Tragedy. In Durban, a Royal Marine's death. On what should have been a night of rugby and relaxation, tragedy struck in the most brutal and senseless way. In March 2012, Brett Williams, a 29-year-old Royal Marine from the UK, attended the Super Rugby game between the Sharks and Melbourne Rebels at Kings Park Stadium in Durban. He had come to unwind and enjoy the match just like any rugby fan would do, but just hours after full time, his life ended in horrifying violence outside the very place that celebrates sportsmanship and unity. Williams was reportedly attacked by a group of men in what started as a small argument. Sadly, that argument quickly turned savage and left a huge stain on a sport that had become so well respected. Witnesses said he was punched, kicked, and left bloodied on the ground. Emergency responders tried to save him but failed. Williams died right outside the gates, just meters from where families had cheered and celebrated moments earlier. The incident shocked both South African and international rugby communities. Just imagine the sight of a British soldier being beaten to death in the heart of a rugby stadium. This dark moment shattered the image of rugby fans as unified and respectful. To an extent, it caused fans of the sport to be seen as animalistic and barbaric. South Africa, already struggling with violent crime, came under harsh scrutiny. The South African Rugby Union offered condolences, but it didn't take long for questions to follow. How did stadium security allow such a beating to happen right under their noses? Where were the police during the chaos? 4 men were eventually arrested and charged with murder. During the trial, disturbing details emerged. Williams hadn't provoked the attack, he wasn't drunk, and he wasn't fighting. He was simply in the wrong place and surrounded by the wrong people. The attack wasn't just a crime, it was a complete failure of safety, humanity, and the values rugby claims to represent. The brutal death of Brett Williams forced rugby to reckon with a haunting reality. Even in a sport built on honour and respect, deadly violence can still find its way in. Red card horror, 11 punches to the head. In June 2001, the British and Irish Lions were touring Australia and anticipation was sky high. But in a warm-up match against the New South Wales Waratahs in Sydney, the world witnessed one of the ugliest acts of violence ever seen on a rugby pitch. The incident was so shocking and vicious, it left fans speechless and players in disbelief. In the first half of the game, a scuffle broke out. Irish fly half Ronan O'Gara, known for his sharp playmaking and competitive edge, had been involved in some minor agitations with opposition players, but nothing justified what came next. Out of nowhere, Waratahs fullback Duncan McRae launched himself at O'Gara as he lay on the ground. Then, in an astonishing display of rage, McRae landed 11 rapid punches directly to O'Gara's face. The stadium became silent. Commentators struggled to find words. O'Gara's face was covered in blood, and he needed 8 stitches to close the wound above his eye. McRae was shown a straight red card and left the pitch, but the damage was already done. It was a scene more fitting for a street brawl than a rugby match, and it was all caught on camera. Public outrage followed instantly, and rugby authorities launched a disciplinary hearing within days. McRae was banned for 7 weeks, but critics argued the punishment didn't match the crime. Some said he should never be allowed to play again. Others demanded criminal charges, because this wasn't just a red card offence, it was an assault broadcast live to millions. The Waratahs and McRae later apologised, and O'Gara chose not to press charges, and many people wondered why. Either way, the scars went deeper than stitches. That moment became a dark symbol of what happens when control is lost and aggression overtakes sportsmanship. The deaths of Chauvin and Prady. We all know rugby is a physical sport. Everyone who steps onto the field knows the risks. But when a player dies in the middle of a match, it sends shockwaves that never really fade. 2 cases, almost a century apart, have shown us just how deadly the game can be when things go horribly wrong. In December 2018, Nicolas Chauvin, an 18-year-old rising star with Stade Francais, took the field with his under-23 squad in France. During a routine double tackle, Chauvin's head and neck collided awkwardly with the turf. What followed was terrifying. He went into cardiac arrest right there on the field. Medical teams fought to revive him, and he was rushed to the hospital. 3 days later, on December 12th, he died from a broken neck and severe spinal trauma. But Chauvin's death wasn't the only incident. It was the third fatality in French youth rugby that year alone. Families and fans demanded change. Coaches and doctors begged for rule reviews, and experts pointed fingers at high tackle techniques and excessive physicality in teenage matches. What was supposed to be a pathway to professional glory had become a death trap for young players. Now rewind to May 1930. Another 18-year-old Michel Prady died in a championship match in France. He had been tackled late and hard by a winger from the opposing team, who we'll talk about later in the video. Prady suffered a broken spine and died from the injury. But what makes this case even more shocking is what happened next. The player who tackled Prady was arrested and tried for manslaughter. Shockingly, the court found him guilty, calling the tackle violent and unnecessary. That was the first known case of a rugby player being tried for something that happened accidentally during a match. Both deaths shook the core of rugby, and they were reminders that safety is not just a side note, it's a matter of life and death. Bloodgate, the fake injury scandal. April 2009, the Harlequins were playing Leinster in a high-stakes Heineken Cup quarter-final. The match was tense, physical, and close, but what happened in the final minutes didn't just cross the line, it tore a hole through the very idea of fair play. The world watched as rugby's image and honour collapsed in a pool of fake blood. With only minutes left on the clock and Harlequins trailing, winger Tom Williams suddenly dropped to the ground. He clutched his mouth, signalling a blood injury. That allowed the team to bring back fly half Nick Evans, their key playmaker, who had been substituted earlier due to injury, but there was a problem. Williams wasn't bleeding, not even close. He had used a hidden blood capsule tucked away in his sock and bit down on it during a pause in play. The deception was rehearsed. It had been planned. And the goal was simple. Cheat the substitution rules, sneak their star player back in and steal a win. But cameras caught the whole thing, and questions started flying when Williams was seen laughing on the bench shortly after being subbed off. Suspicion turned to certainty when investigators reviewed footage and found the capsule. The fallout was instant and explosive. Director of Rugby, Dean Richards, was hit with a 3-year ban. Williams got 4 months and club physio Steph Brennan was banned for 2 years. The scandal shocked fans and humiliated the sport. It was dubbed Bloodgate, and the name stuck like a scar. The club faced massive fines and public trust in the game took a direct hit. The Harlequins were supposed to be a proud English team. Instead, they became the face of the most shameful moment in modern rugby history. Bloodgate wasn't just about cheating, it was about deception, manipulation, and risking player health for the sake of a match. It left a stain that rugby will never fully wash off. Zach Guilford's alcohol tragedy. Rugby may be built on discipline, but behind the scenes, alcohol and substance abuse continue to eat away at its moral core. But this isn't just the occasional drunken night out. This is an ongoing crisis that has become almost normalised. The rugby world watched in disbelief when Zach Guilford, once seen as a future All Blacks great, was found drunk, naked and bleeding in a hotel lobby in Rarotonga back in 2011. That wasn't his first or last slip. Just a year earlier, he had reportedly punched a guest at a private party while heavily intoxicated. Guilford later admitted he had a drinking problem, but the damage to his career and public image was already deep. Australia's Kurtley Beale also made headlines for the wrong reasons. In 2013, he was suspended for sending lewd and offensive text messages to a team official. Then came alcohol-fueled fights with teammates, including one infamous mid-flight bust-up with teammate Cooper Vuna. Despite his immense talent, Beale's off-field conduct repeatedly overshadowed his rugby achievements. His problems were often swept under the rug until they exploded too loudly to ignore. But these are just the big names. According to multiple team insiders and confidential reports, at least 25 rugby players in the past 5 years alone have sought treatment for alcohol or drug addiction. These aren't fringe players. Many are starters, some are internationals, and in many cases their pleas for help came only after public embarrassment, arrests or team suspensions. The problem is cultural. Rugby still glamorises binge drinking, rookie initiations, post-match parties, and weekend blowouts are all part of the lifestyle. Some teams have tried to clean house with stricter protocols and wellness programs, but old habits die hard. Peer pressure in locker rooms and team bonding sessions often masks deeper issues like depression, trauma, or identity struggles. Multiple former players have admitted they felt pressured to drink, even when they didn't want to. Some turned to drugs as a way to cope with stress and performance anxiety. Others spiraled into violence or self-harm when they couldn't cope. One player was caught drunk driving with his child in the car. Another smashed up a hotel room during an international tour. These aren't isolated mistakes, they're symptoms of a wider illness. Now, some voices in the sport are demanding change. Former England player Luther Burrell called out rugby's toxic silence on mental health and substance abuse. He said players are often too scared to speak up, fearing it'll cost them their careers. And he's not wrong. Rugby's obsession with toughness sometimes punishes vulnerability, even when a player's life is falling apart. Simply put, rugby has an addiction problem. And it's not just alcohol, it's the addiction to silence, denial, and the illusion that everything's fine as long as the player performs. Until that changes, more lives and careers will continue to crumble behind the scenes. Criminal assaults on pitch and sidelines. Rugby is known for its physicality, but sometimes that physicality crosses a line into full-blown criminal behaviour. In 2021, a shocking moment during a local Gloucester match left fans horrified. Ryan Charles, a player for Mats and Seconds, punched his opponent Liam Ahern so violently that it shattered Ahern's jaw in 2 places. The blow was unprovoked, unexpected, and completely outside the rules of the game. Ahern required extensive facial surgery, and doctors warned that the damage could affect his speech permanently. What made the situation worse was that Charles tried to downplay the attack, but the footage didn't lie. The punch was deliberate and malicious. The judge in the case made it very clear Charles could have killed somebody. Though he avoided jail time, he was slapped with a 12-month community order and ordered to perform 200 hours of unpaid work. For many, that felt like a slap on the wrist. A sport built on respect had once again allowed brutality to slip through the cracks. The most disturbing case of all didn't happen on a field, it happened at a party. In 2007, Marc Sissillon, a former captain of the French national team and once a hero to many, did the unthinkable. In a drunken rage, he pulled out a firearm and shot his wife 5 times in front of dozens of stunned guests. She died instantly. Sessillon, who had once represented his country with pride, became a convicted murderer. The court sentenced him to 20 years in prison. He was released after serving only 7. Sessillon's descent into madness was not without warning signs. He had struggled with alcohol for years. Friends had noticed mood swings and violent outbursts. But, as is often the case in rugby, no one wanted to speak up. His name, his legacy, and his reputation seemed to shield him from scrutiny. Until it was too late. There are many other examples. Brawls involving rugby players outside nightclubs. Street fights caught on camera. Domestic violence accusations swept under the rug. In a sport that prides itself on honour and discipline, these incidents expose a dark hypocrisy. Players are trained to control aggression on the field. But off it, too many lose that control, and innocent people pay the price. The message from these stories is clear. Rugby needs to stop treating violence as just part of the game. When it spills into real life, it becomes a crime, and the consequences are devastating. Camp Stalrad. Abusive conditioning. In South Africa, in 2003, the world of rugby uncovered one of its most shocking and disgraceful secrets. South Africa's national team, the Springboks, had undergone a pre-World Cup training camp that quickly turned into something much darker. The camp was called Stalrad, which loosely translates to barbed wire, and what happened there sounded more like torture than training. Players were stripped naked and forced into freezing water while the coaches screamed at them. They were made to stand for hours with hoods over their heads. They had to crawl through sharp terrain in complete silence. In one twisted drill, players were ordered to pass a ball underwater while other teammates held them down. In another, they were forced to strip, climb into holes, and listen to the sound of gunfire while being sprayed with cold water. Some were forced to eat their own vomit. The goal, according to then-coach Rudolf Straley, was to toughen them up mentally and emotionally, but in truth, it left lasting scars on many of the players. Some later admitted they suffered nightmares and symptoms of PTSD. One player said it felt more like preparation for war than for sport. Another said he came out of the camp more broken than built. The truth about Stalrad only came out because a whistleblower within the team couldn't stomach it anymore. As soon as the details hit the news, outrage exploded. The South African Rugby Union launched an investigation. Straley resigned in disgrace. Officials scrambled to distance themselves from the fiasco. To this day, Camp Stalrad stands as one of rugby's most disturbing scandals. It wasn't just poor judgment, it was psychological and physical abuse disguised as training. The horror of it shattered the image of the Springboks as disciplined warriors and replaced it with the image of men being treated like prisoners. This wasn't some isolated misstep, it was premeditated, approved, executed with military precision, and it reminded the entire rugby world that behind closed doors, winning can sometimes matter more than human dignity. That kind of thinking must never return. Spear tackler Tana Umaga versus Brian O'Driscoll. June 25th, 2005. The first test match of the British and Irish Lions tour to New Zealand was barely a minute old when disaster struck. All Blacks legend Tana Umaga, alongside teammate Kevin Mialemu, executed a spear tackle on Lions captain Brian O'Driscoll. The tackle lifted O'Driscoll off his feet and slammed him shoulder first into the turf. The pop from his dislocated shoulder could be heard through the stadium. Just like that, his tour was over. The outrage was instant. Replays showed the tackle was reckless and dangerous, but to the shock of millions, no action was taken on the field. No yellow card, no penalty, nothing. The referee missed it, the match continued, and a Legends tour ended before it even began. O'Driscoll was stretchered off in agony. Later scans revealed severe ligament damage that could have ended his career. Fans, players, and pundits worldwide demanded justice, but the All Blacks refused to acknowledge wrongdoing. The incident drove a wedge between the Lions and the New Zealand team. Accusations of dirty play, biased refereeing, and rugby politics erupted into headlines. Umaga later insisted it was accidental, but to this day, many still believe it was deliberate and calculated. Mialemu avoided punishment as well. The Lions called for a siding, but World Rugby declined to take it further. The message that was sent was disturbing. If a spear tackle like that could go unpunished, what else could be excused in the name of competition? The controversy sparked major changes to the laws of the game. Spear tackles were banned outright, and new safety protocols were introduced, but none of that healed O'Driscoll's injury or changed the outcome of that tour. The tackle remains one of the most controversial moments in rugby history. It wasn't just a foul, it was a failure by officials, by governing bodies, and by the very game itself to protect its players. And it showed that even rugby's biggest stars could be sacrificed in the heat of battle with no accountability. World Cup poisoning rumour, the 1995 All Blacks. That Rugby World Cup final in 1995 felt like the climax of a blockbuster. New Zealand faced South Africa at Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg on June 24th. The match ended 12-12 after 80 minutes, but South Africa edged ahead 15-12 in extra time. Yet the result haunted many because of what happened before kickoff. In the days leading up to the final, nearly every All Black was struck down by sudden illness. 27 of the 35 members of the squad fell violently ill. The team doctor Mike Bowen described a scene where players were writhing, feverish and desperate. These were elite athletes now fighting nausea and cramps instead of preparing tactically. By Thursday before the final, the illness spread during a lunch in the hotel. A mysterious waitress nicknamed Susie served the meal. Soon after, players began vomiting and collapsing. Coach Laurie Mines smelled something sinister. He later said, "I've had it from 2 independent sources. I don't think it was a coincidence." He even hired a private investigator to interview hotel staff and trace the origins of the contamination. Brian Lacour, the campaign manager, found it strange that the All Blacks were separated into a different dining room by local organisers. "I thought that was strange," Lacour recalled. "The illness left them weak at altitude and underpowered on the pitch. Even though New Zealand had chances in the final, they lacked energy when it mattered most." Zinzan Brook later reflected, "It definitely wasn't a level playing field." Others blamed dodgy milk or poor food hygiene, but the whisper of deliberate sabotage never died. Nelson Mandela's former bodyguard Rory Stein speculated betting syndicates might have orchestrated the poisoning. No investigation ever turned up proof. The alleged waitress vanished. Rugby fans remained divided. For many, it was a freak outbreak. For others, it is a dark conspiracy etched into rugby folklore. Simply put, the memory of that match remains tainted by suspicion and scandal. The Craig-Joubert controversy. Scotland faced Australia in a Rugby World Cup quarter-final in 2015 at Twickenham. The score was a nerve-wracking 34-32 in Scotland's favour with just seconds to go. Then referee Craig-Joubert blew for a penalty against Scotland. He ruled Scotland was offside when Australian scrum half Nick Phipps deliberately tapped the ball. A decision broadcast replays later showed was wrong. Scotland fans were stunned into silence as Australian kicker Bernard Foley slotted the penalty to win 35-34. Joubert then turned and ran straight off the field without explanation. Television viewers had seen that a Scottish knee might have blocked the ball first, or that replays would have cleared the way for a scrum had they been consulted. But TMO rules did not allow Joubert to review the play. He made an instantaneous call and left before players or coaches could confront him. Scottish captain Greg Laidlaw said he pleaded with Joubert to check replay, but his request was ignored. Gavin Hastings later described the decision as one of the worst things he has seen on a rugby field. He planned to confront Joubert in future meetings about the incident. World Rugby admitted Joubert had made a mistake and promised to review TMO protocols for future tournaments. Some defended Joubert. Australia coach Michael Chaker said he understood Joubert's exit, believing angry fans were hurling bottles at him on the pitch sidelines. Yet for Scottish players and supporters, it was a crushing moment of injustice. A World Cup dream died not by a brilliant play, but by a single whistle blown in error and a referee fleeing the field. It opened debate on referee accountability and use of technology at the sport's pinnacles. The image of Joubert disappearing into the tunnel remains burned in fans' minds as one of rugby's most shocking and memorable controversies. Salary fraud, the Saracens scandal. Between 2016 and 2019, the elite English club Saracens operated in the shadows of financial deceit. They repeatedly breached the Premiership's £7 million salary cap. How did they get away with it? Club owner Nigel Ray and directors used third-party companies to funnel undisclosed payments into players' pockets. In 2016-17 alone, they failed to report more than £1.1 million in what the Premiership calls salary in kind via property investments and business deals. For example, players like Maro and Marco Vunipola and England forward Chris Ashton received money through joint property ventures that bypassed formal wage disclosures. Over 3 seasons, they overspent by over £2 million, £1.1 million in 2016 to 17, nearly £100,000 in 2017 to 18, and £906,000 in 2018 to 19. Premiership Rugby's independent panel, led by Lord Dyson, found clear breaches of regulations and rules requiring honest declarations. Sanctions were swift and severe. In November 2019, they were docked 35 league points and fined £5.36 million, a record penalty for rugby union in England. When Saracens refused to appeal, the crisis escalated. In January 2020, they received another 35-point deduction and were relegated to the Championship, a punishment unprecedented in the sport. The scandal rocked the rugby world. Critics called the club Salarysons, pointing to how corporate backing undercut fair competition. Former England captain Chris Robshaw publicly said Saracens stained the sport's image by prioritising dominance over integrity. Rugby's elite had bent rules to maintain their empire, but the consequences were bigger than just demotion. Sponsors withdrew, rival clubs demanded oversight, rugby clubs across Europe began auditing finances carefully, and salary cap regulations were tightened with more transparency. The scandal proved that off-field cheating can be as damaging as cheating on it. Simply put, it put fairness at the heart of rugby on trial and exposed its vulnerability. Amateur player manslaughter, Tailantu, guilty. Now let's go back to May 4th, 1930. Remember the player I spoke about earlier whose tackle killed another player? Yeah, a French championship semi-final between teams Pau and Agen ended in horror. 18-year-old winger Michel Prady chased a loose ball. Pau forward Fernand Tailantu charged in with a late, dangerous tackle, pinning Prady's neck under crushing force. When Prady stood up, he collapsed moments later. Emergency aid was summoned, but he died that evening. Autopsy revealed a fractured spine and internal bleeding. News rippled across France, giving birth to chilling phrases like rugby of death. And public outrage left no room for excuses. Tailantu faced manslaughter charges in Bordeaux court in January 1931. 30 witnesses testified. Some said Prady did not even have the ball when he was slammed. The referee defended Tailantu as a strong but fair player. Yet the judge ruled the tackle was violent, unreasonable, and criminally reckless. Tailantu was convicted and sentenced to 3 months in prison, suspended, along with a 200 franc fine plus court costs. He would never face jail time, but the conviction damaged his reputation and career forever. Tayantu gave up rugby because he was consumed by guilt. He told reporters he lost 12 pounds that summer from grief and shame. The case sparked debate in Parliament and led to discussions about criminal liability in sport. It forced rugby administrators to re-examine tackle rules and safety. The trial became a landmark in sports law, holding players legally accountable if they cause death. It cast a shadow over amateur rugby, reminding that even games played on dusty fields can end in tragedy. The memory of young Michel Prady remains a somber warning that violence on the field can have irreversible consequences. If you enjoyed this, there's plenty more rugby videos in the works. I would greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe. Thanks for watching.